Who's going to win Indiana's open U.S. Senate seat and open governor's seat in 2024? Today on Political Access, we're going to take a look at both of these elections. And as we can see right here, former governor of Indiana, Mitch Daniels, has declined to run for the U.S. Senate. So the dominoes are starting to fall in what is expected to be a safe Republican seat in Indiana. And Mitch Daniels was a popular Republican governor about a decade and a half to 2 decades ago. Now he's in his 70s and he's passing on this run. And let's switch over to Wikipedia and see where this leaves us. First off, the incumbent Republican is Mike Braun. Here's his 2018 election. He pulled off somewhat of an upset in the Republican primary, and in the general election, even though it was a blue wave, he knocked off one-term incumbent Democrat Joe Donnelly, and he did it convincingly enough, winning by about 6 points with almost 51% of the vote. So, jump ahead to 2024, Mike Braun has declined to run for re-election. You may have already heard that he's launched his bid to run for governor, and we'll get to that race in a few minutes, but that is why this seat is open. So everyone is going to be scrambling for this open seat, and it's Indiana. It's a pretty red state, so all the focus is going to be on the Republican side. So we've got one declared candidate, and that is U.S. Rep. Jim Banks. He's been in office since 2017. He's from the northeast part of the state, and a lot of the Republican base, especially the Trump side, does support Jim Banks. He's much more of a populist, America First type of candidate, and that's the kind of person who's likely to have success in Indiana. So even though there's only one declared candidate, Banks is going to be one of the strongest competitors. Now, if he goes hard on abortion or only talks about the federal budget deficit, that I think would hurt him. But if he focuses on the border and crime, pushes back on some of the woke ideology, doesn't have endless support for foreign wars, and at least pushes back somewhat on corporate power and influence, taps into some of those economic concerns, hopefully would have some kind of legitimate health care plan. All that stuff I think would lead to Banks or most any Republican having success in this particular race. Now, other publicly expressed candidates here are Eric Holcomb, he's the governor of Indiana, and Victoria Spartz. Now, I do hear Eric Holcomb does get a mixed reaction. He seems to have more fallen down the establishment route. There were concerns about some of his COVID policies. So a lot of the Trump base or the libertarians, they're not a big fan of Eric Holcomb. But if he did jump into this race, everybody knows who he is. I think he would be a legitimate competitor. Victoria Spartz, she's in her second term in the U.S. House. She represents a suburban district that's outside of Indianapolis, and she was actually born in Ukraine. So that is an interesting dynamic if she jumped into this race. I think Ukraine will be an important topic in the Republican primary. She's going to have a special connection to it, but in this primary, I suspect a lot of Republicans are not going to want to support tons more funding for Ukraine instead of putting more dollars into the U.S. She's only been in the House a couple of years, so she might hold off, but there is a decision here expected in early 2023. Now, other than that, there's also additional potential candidates. We've got Trey Hollingsworth. Now, he just left the House in 2023, so he hasn't been out too long if he ends up deciding to get into this race. Another potential candidate here is Todd Rokita. He is the current Indiana Attorney General. He also served in the U.S. House, and he did run for the U.S. Senate in 2018, and he lost that nomination to Mike Braun. So he would have high name recognition as well. Do think this is going to be an interesting primary. Banks is out ahead of everybody. It doesn't mean he's going to win, but we'll see if that ends up scaring off any of these other potential candidates. Down here we've got some endorsements, all for Jim Banks. Stephen Miller, he was close to Donald Trump, but he also has an endorsement here from Marco Rubio. Now here's the hypothetical polling. Both of these are from back in December. And the vote is spread out here. I don't really think this is useful. There's 39% undecided, and that's without Mitch Daniels in the race. Then Todd Rokita becomes the frontrunner, but that's with only 16% of the vote. Jim Banks is at 14, Victoria Spartz is at 12, and even Trey Hollingsworth is at 11. So that is a four-way race in this poll. Now, if Mitch Daniels was in the race, he would be the frontrunner. That makes sense. Popular governor, everybody knows who he is. But Daniels is out, so it's going to be a big battle for the Republicans in this Indiana Senate race. Now, we can't forget about the Democrats in this race. It's a red state, but it's not so red that the Democrats have zero chance. Joe Donnelly, the Democrat, did win this seat back in 2012, and we see here he is one of the potential candidates to get into this race. Donnelly was considered more of a mild, conservative type of Democrat. He tried to appeal to some of the moderate Republicans, and in that blue wave of 2018, it ended up not working, but Joe Donnelly is probably the best candidate. Everybody already knows who he is. And there's also Joe Hogsett here. He is the current mayor of Indianapolis. He's potentially somebody that could jump into this race. So it could be one of those two, or there's always a chance somebody new rises up. maybe a super progressive candidate that just wants to make a name for themselves, not be competitive in the election, but maybe use it as a springboard to run for another office. So we see the race is currently rated as solid Republican. But let's take a look at the governor's race. Now, there's not as much to say about this. Eric Holcomb, the current governor, he's term limited out in 24, and Mike Braun, the incumbent senator, he stepped down to run for this office. So Braun is probably going to be the front runner, but he's not alone. Suzanne Crouch, the lieutenant governor of Indiana, she's also in this race. So she's not completely unknown, but lieutenant governor, it's not really a high-profile office. And Braun, already having been known for stepping away from the Senate to run for this office, I would say he's got to be the front runner. But we also see Trey Hollingsworth, he's listed here as publicly expressed interest. And there's also some more potential candidates here. Todd Rokita, he's listed here again. And Mitch Daniels, he's declined to run for his old office. And we've got one poll here. Now, this is from the Mike Braun campaign, so you have to keep that in mind, but it does show him at 47%. Suzanne Crouch is at 10%, 37% undecided. There's one other poll here from December, shows Mike Braun at 25%, undecided is at 40%. So a lot are undecided, but I would suspect Mike Braun, unless he completely implodes, he's likely to be the nominee. So a lot of time yet, so something could definitely change, but if you have to pick right now, you'd have to put your money on Mike Braun. On the Democratic side, it's an open seat, so this is their best bet to win this office. Now, Indiana has not elected a Democratic governor since 2000, so it's been a while. It does not seem like they're going to be competitive here, but again, there's a long way off. The national environment could favor the Democrats, and statewide politics are different than national politics. It's possible an electable Democrat gets through the primary, Republicans totally implode, and that would enable a Democrat to win. Now, there's one person that's formed an exploratory committee. That's Jennifer McCormick. She actually held statewide office in Indiana as the superintendent of public instruction, and she got out of office only in 2021. But the thing about her is she used to be a Republican. A couple of years ago, she decided to switch and become a Democrat, sort of similar to what Joy Hoffmeister did in Oklahoma. Hoffmeister seemed like a solid candidate for the Democrats in a red state, but she ended up getting completely wiped out. Granted, that was an incumbent. This would be an open seat here in Indiana, and she would try to court a lot of those independent, middle-of-the-road, swing-type voters. And I don't know a whole lot about her, but she doesn't seem like a bad candidate for the Democrats. We also have Christina Hale and Tom McDermott. Hale was the nominee going up against Victoria Spartz in the House in 2020. It's a close race, but she lost. McDermott, he is the longtime mayor of Hammond, Indiana. He's had some failed attempts at other offices. Most recently here in 2022, he was the Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate, and he lost by over 20 points. And then there's similar potential candidates here as the U.S. Senate. And you might be wondering where Pete Buttigieg is, given he was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. Well, apparently he has moved and changed his address to Michigan. So Republicans are certainly favored for both of these elections, but it's not impossible for a Democrat to be competitive. So we'll see what happens, but that's a quick overview and a recap of what's going on in the upcoming elections for U.S. Senate and Governor in Indiana. So what do you think about either of these two races or any of the candidates? Let me know down below. On your way out, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.